I needed $3,500 to keep from losing my eyesight. We just bought a vacation home, my son said. We can't spare a dime. Then his wife took the phone from him. Stop asking my husband for money. The line went dead. 3 days later, that same son would be pounding on my front door, begging me to undo something he never imagined I had the courage to do. But that afternoon, I didn't know anything about lawyers, amended documents, or what 30 years of sacrifice had quietly built. I only knew the numbers on the hospital estimate were swimming together on my kitchen table. My name is Walter Bennett. I was 68 years old and living alone in the same brick ranch house outside Dayton, Ohio, where my wife Margaret and I had raised our children. For almost 40 years, I worked as a union electrician. I climbed extension ladders in January, crawled through hot commercial attics in August, and spent more nights than I can count eating sandwiches out of a metal lunchbox in unfinished buildings. I'd always been good with my hands. That made it harder to admit I could no longer trust my eyes. It started with small things. Street lights had cloudy rings around them. The numbers on the microwave looked smeared. One morning I poured coffee beside the mug and stood there watching it spread across the counter before I understood what I had done. I quit driving after dark without telling anyone. At night I counted the 7 steps from my bedroom to the bathroom. I kept one hand against the hallway wall so I wouldn't drift into the little table Margaret had bought at an estate sale. The worst part was the photograph above the mantel. It had been taken at our 35th wedding anniversary. Margaret was laughing because the photographer had told me to loosen up, and I had said I'd been trying for 35 years. I could still see the outline of her silver hair and the pale blue dress she loved, but her eyes were gone. Not really gone, of course, just swallowed by the blur. I told myself I needed stronger reading glasses. Then I nearly stepped in front of a grocery cart outside the Kroger on Wilmington Pike because I hadn't seen it coming from my left. That finally scared me enough to make an appointment. The ophthalmologist's office smelled like disinfectant and burnt coffee. After the scans, the doctor rolled his chair closer and turned the monitor toward me. There's been significant progression, he said. I stared at the bright shapes on the screen. So what do we do? He explained the procedure in careful terms. Outpatient, strong chance of protecting the vision I had left. Recovery would take patience, and there were no guarantees. How long can I wait? I asked. He paused just long enough to answer the question without answering it. I wouldn't put this off, Mr. Bennett. After insurance, the surgical center wanted $3,500 before they would confirm the date. I had money technically, a paid-off house, retirement accounts, a small investment account Margaret and I had built over the years. But money tied up in property and retirement funds doesn't help much when someone at a billing desk wants payment now. My emergency savings had taken several hits. Margaret's last months had been expensive, even with insurance. Then the roof leaked over the back bedroom. Property taxes went up. I needed dental work I had postponed too long. And 4 years earlier, my son Brian had called me after a business investment went bad. Dad, I'm in trouble, he'd said. I wired him $28,000 the next morning. I didn't make him sign anything. I didn't tell Margaret's sister or bring it up at Thanksgiving. He was my son and he was scared. So I sat at my kitchen table with the surgical estimate under my hand and called him. Brian answered on the 4th ring. Hey, Dad, can I call you back? We're in the middle of something. There was music behind him, people laughing. I heard glasses touch. What are you celebrating? I asked. We closed on the lake place. He sounded proud. Brian and his wife Vanessa had been talking about buying a vacation property for more than a year. He had sent me pictures of stone fireplaces, boat docks, and kitchens larger than my entire first apartment. That's good, I said. Congratulations. I almost let him go. Then the words on the hospital paper blurred again. Brian, I need to ask you something. His voice changed, just slightly. What's going on? I explained the diagnosis. I told him the procedure needed to happen soon and that the surgical center required $3,500. I'm not asking you to give it to me, I said. I can move money from an account, but it may take a couple of weeks. I just need a short loan. The music seemed to grow louder. Brian exhaled. Dad, this is really bad timing. I know. The closing cost more than we expected. There's furniture, repairs, association fees. We're stretched thin. I looked around my kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. The old wall clock ticked above the doorway. I wouldn't ask if it could wait. You always make things sound like emergencies. For a second, I thought I had misheard him. The doctor said I could lose more of my sight. Someone spoke near him, Vanessa. What does he want? Brian lowered his voice, but not enough. Money for some eye procedure. A moment later, her voice came directly through the phone. Walter, we have children and 2 properties to pay for. I understand that. You've been retired for years. You should have planned for medical expenses. I did plan, I said. Life just costs more than the plan. She gave a short laugh. Then call the hospital. Stop asking my husband to clean up every problem. I waited for Brian to take the phone back. I waited for him to say, that's my father. Don't speak to him that way. Instead, I heard him in the background. Vanessa, just hang up. Then silence. I sat there with the phone still against my ear. I wasn't angry at first. Anger would have been easier. I felt embarrassed. At 68 years old, after spending my life fixing other people's problems, I had been made to feel ashamed for asking my own son to help me protect my eyesight. My right hand rested on the table. There was a pale scar across my index finger from a job I'd taken when Brian was 16. He had wanted a set of golf clubs his friends were all getting. Margaret said we couldn't afford them. I worked 2 overnight shifts at a warehouse renovation and bought the clubs. Back then, I had been proud that my son never had to feel poor. Now he owned a second home, and I couldn't borrow $3,500 from him for 2 weeks. Around 6:30, my doorbell rang. I turned on the porch light, even though it wasn't dark yet. Rachel stood outside in navy scrubs with her hair pulled back. She held a paper grocery bag against her hip. You look terrible, she said. Nice to see you too. I brought soup. She walked past me, set the bag on the counter, and stopped when she saw the medical papers. Rachel had been my daughter for more than 20 years. Not by blood, not at first by law, but she had a way of noticing what people tried hardest to hide. Dad, she said quietly, what did the doctor say? I tried to tell her it was nothing. She folded her arms. I told her everything. She didn't insult Brian. She didn't shake her head or call Vanessa names. She picked up the estimate and moved it closer to the lamp. What's the surgical center's number? No. That wasn't a yes or no question. You have a mortgage, you have your own bills, and you have 1 set of eyes. Before I could argue again, she pulled an envelope from her purse and placed it on the table. Open that after I leave. Rachel, after I leave, otherwise you'll spend 20 minutes trying to hand it back. She hugged me, picked up her keys, and walked out before I could stop her. Inside the envelope was a cashier's check for exactly $3,500. There was also a note. Dad, you never made me earn the right to be your daughter. You just kept showing up until I believed I was allowed to stay. Let me show up for you now. I pressed the paper flat against the table because my hands had started shaking. That check would save my eyesight. But what happened before it arrived had already changed the way I saw my family. The next morning, I called Rachel before 7. She answered on the second ring. Please tell me you didn't try to drive anywhere. Good morning to you too. Dad, I'm calling about the check. There was a pause, followed by the sound of a cabinet closing. I figured, I can't take $3,500 from you. You already did. I haven't deposited it. Then deposit it. I stood at the kitchen counter with one hand wrapped around a mug of coffee. Outside, a city truck rumbled down the street, spreading salt over pavement that had barely frosted. Rachel, you have a mortgage. So do millions of people. You're still paying off school. I'm ahead on it. You need savings. I have savings. I rubbed my forehead. You don't owe me for raising you. Her voice softened. Then Brian didn't owe you for raising him either. But that isn't what this is. What is it then? It's what family does when somebody is scared. I didn't answer. Rachel had a way of putting her finger right on the thing I was trying not to name. I had been scared in the doctor's office, scared at the grocery store, scared every night when I counted the steps to the bathroom and wondered whether one day I would wake up unable to see the wall beside me. But fear wasn't something men of my generation talked about easily. We called it concern. We called it being practical. We called it anything except what it was. Rachel waited. Finally, I said, I'll pay you back. You can try. That sounds like a threat. It is. I laughed for the first time since the appointment. That was Rachel. She rarely gave speeches. She just stood where she intended to stand and waited for the rest of us to catch up. She had not always been that steady. The first time Margaret brought her home, Rachel was 17 and carrying everything she owned in a faded black backpack. Margaret had met her through a youth mentoring program run by a church near downtown Dayton. Rachel had been in foster care since she was 11. By 17, she had lived with enough families to stop calling any place home. She stood in our entryway wearing a gray sweatshirt 2 sizes too large and kept looking past us toward the front door. Margaret showed her the spare bedroom. Fresh sheets, a secondhand dresser, yellow curtains Margaret had sewn herself. Rachel set her backpack beside the bed but never opened it. At dinner, she barely spoke. She ate quickly, then slipped 2 rolls into her sweatshirt pocket when she thought we weren't looking. I saw her do it. I didn't say anything. Later, I left a plastic container of sandwiches in the refrigerator with a note that said, "For anyone who gets hungry." By morning, they were gone. Rachel expected rules to change without warning. She expected kindness to come with a bill attached. Every question sounded like an accusation to her. "Where are you going?" meant we didn't trust her. "What time will you be home?" meant we were looking for a reason to lock her out. Once she came home 2 hours past curfew and found me sitting on the porch in my work jacket. She stopped at the bottom of the steps. "I know," she said. "I'll get my stuff." "You'll get inside." She stared at me. "You're throwing me out." "No, I'm angry." "What's the difference?" That question stayed with me. I stood up slowly because I had spent the day pulling cable through a warehouse ceiling and my knees were stiff. "The difference is you still have to face me tomorrow." She looked like she didn't believe me, but she came inside. Another time, while learning to drive, she backed Margaret's Buick into the wooden post beside the garage. The taillight cracked, and there was a deep scrape along the quarter panel. Rachel got out of the car, pale and shaking. "I'll pay for it," she said. "You don't have any money." "Then I'll leave." Margaret looked at me, and I could see she wanted to cry. Instead, I handed Rachel a flashlight. "You're going to hold this while I remove the broken housing." She blinked. "You're not sending me back?" "You hit a post, Rachel. You didn't rob a bank." It took time for her to understand that mistakes had consequences without automatically ending relationships. She was suspended from school once after shoving a boy who had made a joke about foster kids. Margaret attended the meeting with the principal. On the drive home, Rachel sat against the passenger door and said, "You can stop pretending now." Margaret kept her eyes on the road. "Pretending what?" "That you want me." Margaret pulled the car into a pharmacy parking lot, put it in park, and turned toward her. "We're dealing with what you did," she said. "We are not disposing of the person who did it." Rachel didn't speak for the rest of the drive. That evening, I noticed her backpack was no longer beside the bed. She had placed it in the closet. It may not sound like much, but Margaret and I both understood what it meant. She believed she might be staying. Brian was in college by then. He came home every few weekends and never quite knew what to make of Rachel. He wasn't cruel, not openly, but there were comments. "Guess I'm not the only child anymore." Or, "You two sure are spending a lot of time on her." Margaret would remind him that love wasn't a pie. Giving someone else a piece didn't mean his got smaller. I mostly stayed quiet. That was one of my mistakes. I kept telling myself Brian would grow out of the jealousy. I thought time would smooth everything over because that is what fathers often tell themselves when they don't want to confront a problem. Rachel graduated high school with average grades and perfect attendance her senior year. When she decided she wanted to become a nurse, she said it was because scared kids deserved at least one adult who didn't leave the room. Financial aid covered most of her classes, but not all of them. I took extra weekend work installing lighting in a strip mall. Margaret sold a bracelet she rarely wore. Rachel never forgot it. Years later, after she was working full-time at Dayton Children's, she asked us to meet her at the Montgomery County Courthouse. She was 22 by then. The clerk looked over the adoption paperwork, then smiled at her. "Most people do this when the child is younger." Rachel said, "I know the paperwork is late. The family isn't." Margaret cried so hard she had to sit down. I pretended there was dust in my eye. Now, all those years later, Rachel was the one arranging my surgery. By 9 that morning, she had called the surgical center, confirmed the payment, and secured a Thursday appointment. I told her I could take a cab home afterward. "The clinic won't allow that," she said. "You need an adult to sign you out and stay overnight." "I am an adult." "Then start acting like one and stop arguing." I sent Brian one message. "Surgery is scheduled for Thursday. Rachel helped me arrange it. The message showed as delivered. He never answered. Thursday morning, Rachel picked me up before sunrise. The waiting room was cold and too bright. She sat beside me reading the consent forms aloud because the print kept slipping out of focus. When the nurse came to take me back, I handed Rachel my house key. She closed my fingers around it. "You gave me a key before I believed I belonged anywhere," she said. "I'm not losing you now." As they wheeled me toward the operating room, the last face I could still recognize clearly was hers. When I opened my eyes, everything looked washed in white. Not clear, just brighter. A nurse leaned over me with a warm smile. "How are you feeling, Mr. Bennett?" Like somebody poured sand in my eye. She laughed. "That's a pretty common review." My right eye was covered with a hard plastic shield. My throat felt dry and my legs were heavier than I expected. "Your daughter is waiting for you." For a second, I pictured Margaret. Then reality settled back in. "Rachel." The nurse helped me sit up slowly before leading me into the recovery area. Rachel stood the moment she saw me. "Well," she asked, "I think I still look handsome." "You definitely still need stronger jokes." She squeezed my shoulder while the nurse went over the instructions. Eye drops 4 times a day. No lifting anything heavier than 10 pounds. Sleep on my left side. Wear the protective shield at night. Call immediately if I notice sudden flashes of light or severe pain. Rachel listened with the focus of someone who had spent years working in a hospital. I mostly watched her. When the nurse finished, she handed Rachel a folder. "You'll probably remember this better than he will today." Rachel smiled. "I usually do." The ride home was quiet, not uncomfortable. Comfortable enough that silence didn't need filling. As we turned onto my street, Rachel looked over. "You hungry?" "A little. I made chicken noodle soup yesterday." "You planned ahead?" "I've met you before." Back at the house, she helped me settle into my recliner. The television stayed off. She heated the soup, labeled my eye drop bottles with large black stickers, and taped a handwritten schedule to the refrigerator. 8 a.m., 12 p.m., 4 p.m., 8 p.m. The numbers were big enough that I could almost read them through the haze. Almost. That first evening, she stayed until nearly 10. Before leaving, she checked every light bulb in the hallway, placed bright blue painter's tape along the edge of the basement step, and moved a small rug that she said was an accident waiting to happen. "You don't have to keep doing all this," I told her. "I know." She kissed my forehead. "Good night, Dad." The house became very quiet after she left. I'd forgotten how loud loneliness could be. The first week after surgery moved slowly. Healing isn't dramatic. It's repetitive. Drops. Timers. Short walks around the living room. Trying not to bend over. Trying not to rub an eye that seemed determined to itch all day. Rachel came before work some mornings. Other days she stopped by after 12-hour shifts. Sometimes she only stayed 15 minutes. Sometimes an hour. She never asked what the surgery had cost. Never asked whether I planned to repay her. She simply checked my medications, made sure I had groceries, and left. Brian finally texted 5 days after the operation. "Hope the procedure went well. Things have been crazy here." I stared at the message for a long time. Not because it was cruel. Because it was so empty. He hadn't asked whether I could see, whether I needed anything, whether I was frightened. He was explaining his absence instead of asking about my recovery. I typed 3 different replies before deleting each one. In the end, I wrote nothing. I see. 10 days later, my ophthalmologist removed the protective shield during a follow-up appointment. He held up 3 fingers. "How many?" 3. "Good." He smiled. "You're healing exactly the way I'd hoped." The room looked brighter than it had in months. Edges were beginning to return. Letters weren't perfect yet, but they no longer floated into one another. Driving would still have to wait. Heavy lifting too. But I was improving. For the first time in months, I believed I might actually keep enough vision to remain independent. That afternoon, Rachel drove me home. "I need to find some paperwork," I told her after lunch. "What kind?" "Insurance, investment statements." Margaret always knew where everything was. She nodded. "I'll help." Margaret's writing desk sat in the corner of our bedroom. I hadn't opened the bottom drawer since the week after her funeral. Not because I couldn't. Because I hadn't been ready. Rachel carried the small, fireproof box into the dining room table while I searched for the key taped beneath the drawer. Margaret had always hidden spare keys in places only she could remember. Somehow, I still remembered this one. Inside the box were neat folders: house deed, insurance policies, retirement accounts, tax returns, everything labeled in Margaret's careful handwriting. Rachel lifted one envelope. "This says Walter only." I recognized Margaret's handwriting immediately. My chest tightened. "I'll read it later." Rachel started to hand it over. Then she stopped. "Actually," she said softly, "I think she'd want you to read it now." She quietly walked into the kitchen and gave me privacy. For several minutes, I simply stared at the envelope. Finally, I opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Walter, if you're reading this, then I'm no longer there to remind you that taking care of yourself isn't selfish. You've spent your whole life believing love means enduring everything quietly. It doesn't. Love also means allowing people to carry you when your legs become tired. And sometimes, love means accepting that not everyone will choose to. Please don't divide what we built out of guilt. Make sure you're safe first. After that, leave what remains where you found loyalty, not where tradition tells you it belongs. I love you. Always. Margaret." I read the last 3 lines twice, then a third time, not because the words were blurry, because they hurt. Margaret knew me better than anyone ever had. She knew I would keep giving chances long after common sense told me to stop. Rachel returned quietly. "You okay?" I folded the letter carefully. "I miss your mother." "I know. She always knew what I needed before I did." Rachel smiled sadly. "She still does, apparently." The following Monday, I called Daniel Mercer. He had handled Margaret's estate planning for years. His office overlooked Courthouse Square in downtown Dayton. When I arrived 2 days later, he stood to shake my hand. "Walter." To Daniel. He looked at my eye. "How's the recovery?" "Better every day." "Good." After a few minutes of small talk, he opened a thick blue folder. Margaret was very organized. She always was. Daniel smiled. She also anticipated something. "What?" "That one day you'd need permission to put yourself first." I looked down at the papers. "I've been thinking about Brian." "I assumed you had." "I don't want revenge." Daniel leaned back. "Good. I don't even want to punish him." "What do you want?" I answered without thinking. "I don't ever want to depend on someone who sees my survival as an inconvenience." The room became very quiet. Daniel nodded once. "I think that's a healthier question." He spent nearly an hour walking me through the trust. Not legal jargon. Plain English. Margaret and I had created a revocable living trust years earlier. After she died, everything remained available for my care. I was still in control. I could change beneficiary distributions. I could appoint someone else to make medical decisions if I became unable to speak for myself. I could replace the person listed to manage my finances if I ever lost capacity. I frowned. I forgot Brian's listed for those. He is. So if something happened to me, he would have significant authority. A chill ran through me. For the first time since my diagnosis, the thing frightening me most wasn't blindness. It was imagining Vanessa holding my checkbook while Brian decided what medical treatment was worth paying for. Daniel seemed to read my thoughts. "You're not deciding who deserves money today." "No. You're deciding who you trust with your life." That sentence settled over the room like fresh concrete. Heavy. Permanent. I looked out the office window toward the courthouse lawn. Cars rolled through the intersection below. People hurried to lunch. Life kept moving. Mine suddenly felt divided into before and after. I turned back toward Daniel. "I think," I said quietly, "it's finally time I stopped confusing guilt with love." Daniel didn't rush me. That was one thing I appreciated about him. He didn't slide papers across the desk and tell me where to sign. He asked questions. Did I understand the value of my estate? Yes. Was anyone pressuring me? No. Had Rachel asked to be placed in control of anything? Absolutely not. Was I angry with Brian? Yes, I said. Daniel waited. But anger isn't the reason I'm here. What is? I looked down at Margaret's letter resting beside the blue folder. I need to know that if I'm sick, confused, or lying in a hospital bed, The person making decisions won't be thinking about what my care is costing them. Daniel nodded. That's a legitimate concern. We spent another hour going through the details. The house was worth more than I realized. We had bought it when Dayton's southern suburbs were still mostly cornfields and two-lane roads. Add the retirement accounts, Margaret's life insurance, and the money from a small piece of land her father had left her, and the estate came to roughly $1,150,000. Not all cash. Not money I could throw around. But enough to explain why Brian had always shown unusual interest whenever I mentioned updating paperwork. The original plan divided everything equally between him and Rachel. Brian was also listed as my financial power of attorney, healthcare representative, and successor trustee. I had agreed to that years earlier because he worked in wealth management. At the time, it seemed practical. Now all I could hear was Vanessa saying, "You should have planned for medical expenses." I had planned. I had simply made the mistake of trusting the wrong person to carry out the plan. "I want your firm to serve as successor trustee," I told Daniel. "That can be arranged. I want Rachel handling medical decisions if I can't speak for myself. We'll need to discuss that with her before she accepts. She'll say yes." Daniel gave me a small smile. "I suspect she will. I left Brian part of the estate, 35%. Not because I believed he had earned it, and not because I was afraid of looking cruel. He was still my son. I could not erase 43 years because of one phone call. But I also could not pretend the call was only one mistake. It had revealed years of distance I had excused because the truth was painful. Rachel would receive 65%, including the house if I still owned it when I died. A separate amount would remain reserved for my long-term care, and a modest donation would go to a local organization that helped older adults with vision loss. Brian would receive money someday. What he would not receive was control over me. When Daniel finished making notes, he capped his pen. "Would you like me to contact both of them?" "Yes." "Do you want the changes completed before the meeting?" I thought about it. "Yes." That surprised him. "You're certain?" "If I invite them in before I sign, it becomes a negotiation." "And you don't want that?" "No, I want them to hear it from me, but I'm not asking permission." 3 weeks later, we met in Daniel's conference room. Brian and Vanessa arrived 10 minutes early. I knew because when I stepped off the elevator, I could see them through the glass wall. Brian wore a navy suit and polished brown shoes. Vanessa had a leather folder open in front of her and was speaking quietly while tapping something with her pen. They looked prepared. Rachel arrived 4 minutes late wearing navy scrubs and carrying a paper cup of coffee. "I'm sorry," she said. "We had a discharge issue on the pediatric floor." You're fine," Daniel told her. She took the chair farthest from his desk. No folder. No questions. Brian stood and gave me an awkward hug. "How's the eye?" "Improving." "You should have told me the surgery was that serious." I looked at him. I did. His face tightened. "You caught us at a bad time." Vanessa leaned forward. "The property closing was extremely stressful, Walter. There were fees nobody warned us about." Rachel looked down at her coffee. I could tell she was trying not to react. Daniel opened the meeting. "Walter asked everyone here because he has completed several amendments to his estate plan. Before we discuss the details, I want to make one point clear." He looked at Brian, then Vanessa. "Walter has undergone an independent competency review. These decisions are lawful, voluntary, and already executed. This meeting is informational." Vanessa's pen stopped moving. Brian said, "Already executed?" "Yes." Daniel began with the positions of authority. Brian had been removed as financial power of attorney, removed as healthcare representative, removed as successor trustee. Brian stared at me. "You're putting Rachel in charge of everything?" "No," I said. "Daniel's firm will handle the money if I can't. Rachel will speak for my healthcare." "Why?" "Because she has already shown she can listen when I'm afraid." Rachel turned toward me. "Dad, you didn't tell me any of this." "I know." "I don't know if I'm qualified." "You're a nurse." "That doesn't mean—" "It also means you came when I needed you." She looked uncomfortable, which was exactly why I trusted her. Vanessa cleared her throat. "What about the house and the investments?" There it was. Not my health. Not my independence. The estate. Daniel explained the new distribution in a calm voice. 65% to Rachel, 35% to Brian. The house to Rachel, provided it remained part of the trust. Rachel's face lost its color. No, she said immediately. Dad, no. I didn't give you that money for this. I know. You can't make it look like I did. I'm not. Then change it back. Vanessa let out a sharp breath. Unbelievable. Brian turned toward her. What? I told you to call him after the surgery. He stared at her. You were the one who took the phone. You let me because you didn't want to deal with it. Their voices rose. I lifted one hand. She may have taken the phone, Brian. You were the one who let the call end. He looked at me, and for the first time that morning, he had no answer ready. I reached into my jacket and took out Rachel's envelope. The check was gone, deposited weeks earlier, but I had kept the note. I placed it on the table. She worked a 12-hour shift that day, I said. She has a mortgage, student loans, her own life. She didn't ask whether I could repay her. Rachel shook her head. Dad, please, I continued. She didn't know what I owned. She didn't know there was a trust. She just heard I was scared and came to my house. Brian leaned back. We didn't have $3,500 sitting around. You had enough money, I said. What you didn't have was the willingness. That isn't fair. You had just bought a vacation home. We were stretched thin. You were stretched between a second house and your father's eyesight. The room went silent. You made your choice. Brian's jaw tightened. I'm your son. Yes. Mom would never have wanted this. I unfolded Margaret's letter. My hands were steadier than I expected. I read only one line. Leave what remains where you found loyalty, not where tradition tells you it belongs. Brian looked away. Rachel wiped her cheek with the back of her hand. Daniel closed the folder. The amended documents will be formally distributed after the standard 72-hour administrative period. Brian stood. Delay it. Daniel remained seated. That is Walter's decision. Brian looked at me. Dad. No. Vanessa snapped her folder shut. This is going to destroy the family. I stood slowly. The paperwork didn't destroy anything. It only stopped pretending nothing had already changed. They left without saying goodbye. Through the conference room window, I watched them argue beside their black SUV. Rachel came to stand near me. As we reached the elevator, she offered me her arm. I can see the curb now, I told her. I know, she said. I'm still walking beside you. Exactly 72 hours later, someone began pounding on my front door, hard enough to shake Margaret's picture on the wall. The pounding started just after 8 on a Saturday morning. Not one knock. A series of desperate blows that rattled the old brass knocker Margaret had insisted on buying from an antique shop nearly 30 years ago. I was sitting in the kitchen with my second cup of coffee, reading the newspaper without needing a magnifying glass for the first time in months. The sound made me flinch. I walked to the front window and pulled the curtain aside. Brian stood on the porch. He wasn't dressed the way I was used to seeing him. No pressed suit, no polished shoes. His shirt was wrinkled, the sleeves rolled unevenly to his elbows. His tie hung loose around his neck as if he'd pulled at it all night. His eyes were red, not from alcohol, but from someone who hadn't slept. Folded tightly in one hand were several sheets of paper, the estate documents. He looked up and saw me through the glass. Dad! I opened the door but didn't invite him in immediately. He took one step forward. Please, just one word. I stepped aside. He entered slowly, looking around the house. Nothing had changed. Margaret's quilt still covered the back of the couch. The grandfather clock still ticked in the corner. The framed family photographs still lined the hallway. Only now I could actually see the faces again. I made coffee, I said. He nodded. Okay. Neither of us moved for several seconds. Finally, I carried 2 mugs to the kitchen table. He sat across from me exactly where he had sat hundreds of times growing up. For a moment, all I could see was the little boy who used to ask if pancakes counted as dinner. Then I looked at the papers in his hand. Reality returned. He placed them carefully on the table. Dad, this has gotten completely out of control. I stirred my coffee. Has it? You changed everything because of one phone call. I looked at him. One phone call? You know what I mean. No, Brian. I leaned back. I honestly don't. He rubbed both hands over his face. We were under pressure. I know. The vacation house. I know. The closing cost. I know. He stopped talking. I waited. Finally, I asked quietly, which part was the bad moment? He frowned. What? Which part? Saying no? Or letting your wife shame me? He looked away. Or not calling me for 6 days after surgery? His shoulders dropped. I texted. You explained your absence. Silence. You never asked how I was. He swallowed. I thought Rachel had everything under control. There it is. What? The sentence. He looked confused. You thought somebody else was taking care of me. I watched that sink in. Older people talk about loneliness differently than younger people. It isn't usually about having nobody around. It's about becoming invisible. People assume somebody else called. Somebody else visited. Somebody else picked up your medication. Somebody else checked whether you made it home after surgery. Eventually, everybody assumes. Nobody actually knows. Brian stared into his coffee. I didn't think of it that way. I know. He looked miserable. I've replayed that phone call 100 times. So have I. I should have come over. Yes. I should have called. Yes. I should have helped. Yes. His voice cracked. I'm sorry. I believed he meant it. But I also knew apologies arrive more easily after consequences. He took a deep breath. Vanessa. I raised one finger. No. He stopped. Don't. She was stressed. So were you. She pushed me. You let yourself be pushed. It wasn't entirely my fault. I held his eyes. She spoke the words. He nodded slowly. You agreed with the silence afterward? His shoulders slumped. There was nothing left to argue. After a while, he asked, Can I ask you something? You just did. Despite everything, he gave a tired smile. I deserve that. Probably. He unfolded the estate papers. I keep thinking there has to be some way to fix this. I didn't answer. I know I messed up. You did. I know Rachel deserves more than I gave her credit for. She does. I know I hurt you. Yes. He looked directly at me. So, what do I do? That question deserved an honest answer. You start by understanding this isn't about money, but the documents are finished. His face fell. So nothing changes? I shook my head. The paperwork stays exactly where it is. He closed his eyes. I've lost everything. I leaned forward. No. You still have your career. You still have your children. You still have your health. You still have 35% of an estate you never earned. You have not lost everything. His eyes filled. You've lost control. That landed harder. Because it was true. For years, Brian had quietly assumed he would one day handle my finances, my medical decisions, my house. Not because we had ever talked about it. Because he assumed that was simply how life worked. Now it wouldn't. After a long silence, he asked, If there hadn't been a trust, I interrupted gently. If there had been no trust, he nodded. Would you still be here this morning? His lips parted. No words came. The clock in the living room ticked loudly. Outside, a lawnmower started somewhere down the street. He lowered his head. I don't know. Thank you. He looked surprised. For telling the truth? He wiped his eyes. I hate that I don't know. I know. I want to say yes, but you can't. He shook his head. No. That honesty mattered more to me than another polished apology. I reached into the drawer beside the table. Inside was Rachel's envelope. I had kept it. The check was long gone. The note remained folded exactly as she had written it. I placed the envelope between us. Brian looked at it. What's that? The reason I can still read the newspaper. He opened the note carefully. His eyes moved across the page. When he finished, he read it again. Very quietly, he asked, She really paid for everything? Yes. She never told me. No. Why? Because she wasn't trying to embarrass you. He sat there for a long time. I kept thinking she wanted to replace me. I almost smiled. Brian, nobody can replace a son. He looked hopeful for half a second. But a son can abandon the responsibilities that come with being one. The hope faded. I don't know how to fix that. You don't fix it today. I stood and carried our empty mugs to the sink. You fix it 100 ordinary days. He listened. You call because you want to hear my voice. You visit without asking about lawyers. You show up when life isn't dramatic. You stop treating family like another investment that only deserves attention when the numbers change. Behind me, I heard him quietly crying. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough that I knew something inside him had finally cracked. When I turned around, he looked older than 43. I don't want the money anymore. I believe you. You do? Yes. He blinked. Then why not change it back? Because if I did, I walked back to the table. Neither of us would ever know whether you stayed for me. I rested my hand on the envelope. Or for what might still become yours someday. He closed his eyes. I understand. I hope one day you really will. He stood. At the front door, he hesitated. Can I come back next weekend? I thought about it. You don't need permission to knock. He nodded. Then he looked toward Margaret's photograph above the mantel. Can you see better now? I smiled softly. Better than I have in years. He understood exactly what I meant. I watched him walk down the driveway without calling him back. I didn't feel victorious. There was no celebration waiting for me. No dramatic satisfaction. Just sadness. And something else. Relief. For the first time in a very long while, I had stopped begging my own son to become the man I always hoped he already was. By early spring, I could see the individual leaves on the maple tree across the street. That may not sound like much. But after months of seeing the world as shapes and shadows, it felt like a miracle. I stood at my front window one morning with a cup of coffee in my hand, watching sunlight catch the edges of the branches. A robin hopped across the lawn, stopped near the bird bath, and tilted its head toward the ground. I could see the red on its chest. I stayed there longer than I needed to. At my next appointment, the ophthalmologist dimmed the lights and asked me to read the chart. E, I said. Good. FPTO. He clicked the lens. How about now? LPE. He leaned back with a satisfied nod. You've made excellent progress, Mr. Bennett. Rachel sat beside me with her purse in her lap. She can stop driving me now, I said. The doctor smiled. That's between you and your daughter. On the way home, I told her she didn't need to keep coming to every appointment. I know, she said. You have patience, a job, your own life. I know. You're going to keep coming anyway. Yes. At a stoplight on Far Hills Avenue, she glanced over at me. You finally catching on? I laughed. For years, I had thought independence meant never needing anybody. Age has a way of correcting that idea. Real independence isn't doing everything alone. It's knowing the people helping you aren't waiting for something in return. A week later, Rachel came over for Sunday dinner. I made pot roast using Margaret's old recipe card. For the first time since my vision began failing, I could read every word in her handwriting without holding the card under a lamp. Add onions after 1 hour. Margaret had underlined after twice because I always put them in too early. Rachel found me smiling at the card. What? Your mother is still correcting me. She was usually right. Don't encourage her. We ate at the kitchen table. After dinner, Rachel helped clear the plates, then sat back down instead of leaving. I want to talk about the trust. I dried my hands on a dish towel. What about it? I still don't want 65%. I know. It's too much. That depends on what's left. You know what I mean. I sat across from her. She looked genuinely troubled. Not excited, not calculating. Troubled. Rachel, the first thing that trust pays for is my care, I said. Home assistance, medical expenses, whatever I need. You don't receive anything until I'm gone. That's not the point. What is? I don't want you thinking I help because of this. I don't. I don't want Brian thinking it either. He may. She looked down. That bothers me. I know. I reached across the table and touched her hand. You gave me that check when you thought I was a retired electrician with a bad eye and an old house. She smiled faintly. That's what you are. Exactly. I told her the decision wasn't payment for one good deed. It was based on years of trust. She had been there for Margaret during chemotherapy. She had checked on me after the funeral. She remembered the anniversary dates nobody else wanted to mention. She showed up for ordinary Sundays when there was no emergency and nothing to gain. I'm leaving the house to someone who understands why it matters, I said. Rachel looked around the kitchen. The worn cabinets. The clock above the doorway. Margaret's recipe box near the stove. Finally, she nodded. Only if your care comes first. It does. And Daniel's firm still handles the finances if you can't. Yes? She squeezed my hand. Then I'll stop arguing. That'll be a first. She laughed and threw the dish towel at me. Brian's return was slower. That was probably a good thing. The first Sunday after our conversation, he called at 7. I let it go to voicemail. His message was simple. Hi, Dad, just checking in. No need to call back if you don't feel like it. The next Sunday, he called again. That time, I answered. We talked for 6 minutes. Weather, work, his daughter's science project. He didn't mention the trust. 2 weeks later, he offered to drive me to an appointment. Rachel already has it covered, I told him. Okay. No sigh. No guilt. No complaint. Just okay. A month after that, he showed up with 2 coffees and noticed the fence leaning along the backyard. That post's rotting, he said. I know. You want me to fix it? Do you know how? He looked offended. You taught me. I taught you to hold a flashlight and complain. He smiled. Some things take longer to learn. The following Saturday, he came back wearing jeans and an old sweatshirt. He brought a post hole digger, a level, and the wrong size bag of concrete. I didn't correct him right away. Some lessons deserve time. He worked for nearly an hour before the rusted post finally came loose. By then his hands were dirty, and there was sweat along his hairline despite the cool air. I sat on the porch steps and watched. Eventually he leaned against the fence and said, I've been thinking about what you said. That sounds dangerous. He gave a tired laugh. I kept believing success meant never needing anybody. I waited. And somewhere along the way, I started treating anyone who needed me like they had failed. The yard was quiet except for a lawn sprinkler clicking 2 houses down. I made you feel small, he said. Yes? I'm sorry. I believed him. That didn't mean everything was repaired. Believing an apology and restoring trust are not the same thing. He looked at the crooked fence. Do you think things can ever go back? No. His face tightened. I stood and picked up the 2 coffee mugs I had brought outside. But that doesn't mean they can't go forward. He took the mug from me. We drank our coffee in silence. Then I pointed toward the new post. It's leaning. He frowned. It's straight. Get the level. Dad, get the level. He shook his head, but he was smiling when he reached for it. Growing old brings losses nobody prepares you for. Strength, speed, friends, a spouse. Sometimes your health. Sometimes the confidence that you can handle whatever comes next. But the deepest hurt isn't always physical. Sometimes it's realizing that the people you once carried no longer notice when you begin to stumble. I learned something else too. Forgiveness does not require handing someone the same power they once misused. Boundaries are not cruelty. Love can leave a door unlocked without surrendering the whole house. Rachel's envelope still sits in Margaret's desk beside her letter. One reminds me of the love we gave. The other reminds me that love, when it is real, often finds its way back. Brian and I are still repairing what broke between us. Some weeks we make progress. Some weeks we drink coffee and argue about whether a fence post is straight. But now, when he knocks on my door, I know he isn't there because of what he might inherit. He is there because I'm still his father. And for now, that is enough. If someone stood beside you when life became frightening, their kindness deserves to be remembered. Share their story if you feel comfortable. Sometimes another person needs to hear that dependable love still exists.